Well, good morning. My name is Tommy, and if we haven't had the chance to meet yet, I'm one of the pastors here at Midtown. And one of the things that we might have in common, I've heard a few people say this is true of you, I know it's true of me, is that I'm easily distracted. Anybody easily distracted? A few of us. I've gotten into this weird habit where I have to turn the GPS on my phone when I get in the car, because if a stray thought enters my mind or I get a phone call, it is not uncommon for me to to wake up from this fog when I get off the phone and go, where am I? Like I just totally lose focus of where I'm going, right? My attention goes to whatever seems urgent, that phone call or what I'm thinking about, and where I was going seems to just get off track, where literally Siri on my phone has to answer the question, like, where am I? Because I've just ended up somewhere I don't know that I am. It's how easy it is for me to lose focus. Maybe you can relate to that. Maybe there are places in your life where you can see that being true. The problem is, if you can relate to this, what I've found is that the things that I get distracted by are never as important as the things I get distracted from. The thing I get distracted by is never as important as the thing I get distracted from, right? What's worse, it's multiple things that I can get distracted by. And maybe this is true for you, and they're never that important. I mean, they're marginally important at times, those things that pop up, but they're never as important as the things in life that I get distracted from. And it's funny when it comes to me sharing a story about ending up somewhere I did not mean to go, right? Ending up somewhere I don't even know where I am. But what's true is that in life, it's a bit more dangerous because the same principle is at work. We can end up 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, and wake up one day and go, how did I get here? Like, I don't remember choosing this future. I don't remember choosing to make such a mess of my life, or maybe not even a mess in my life. How did I end up on this track that I don't remember choosing? I had another plan for my life, another vision. This was not my dream, and this is not what I was imagining for my future. And so perhaps there's something in this season of life that you're finding needs a bit more of your undivided attention over the next several weeks. Maybe the next several months, maybe this season, there's something that needs more undivided attention in the season that you're in. It might be one thing, maybe it's not true for you, maybe it's a list of things, right? But there's usually one thing we can identify that impacts everything. For example, this might be the season, this might be the study that we enter into together, where you decide to work on that habit, that thing that's been dogging you, that you know you've got to get under control, right? Maybe there's a project you have to finish, a relationship that it's time to restore. Perhaps some of you are going to be disappointed in me for bringing this up, but maybe it's a degree that you're like, you know what, I need to finish that, right? I started it and I need to finish it. I don't know what it is for you, but maybe there's something in this season that needs more undivided attention from you because you've gotten distracted. And no judgment, we all get distracted. We all understand that. And here's the thing for me, and it's what I want for you. I don't want what's urgent. Because every single day there's urgent stuff, right? Stuff that pops up. I don't want what's urgent to distract you from what matters most to you or what's most important to you. And maybe most important to your family. Or, as we're going to see, most important in a particular season. So if there's something that you need to get across the finish line, if there's something you need to focus on in this next season, I think the story that we're going to look at together this morning is going to help. If you're new to our church, or maybe you've been journeying with us the past several weeks, you're probably wondering, like, what does this have to do with the season of things we've studied prior? So let me catch you up. In 2024, we decided to focus on the Gospel of John in your New Testament, right? A biography by a biographer of Jesus named John, who was likely the youngest of Jesus' followers during Jesus' earthly ministry, and he lived the longest. And so he had the most perspective with which to write as he looked back on his time with Jesus. And that biography ends, the last chapter of it, with a conversation between Jesus and Peter. And so we picked up Peter. We were like, let's follow him. And at the end of the New Testament, Peter writes 2 letters that we've spent the last significant portion of time studying. And Peter seems to say throughout these letters that in life, as you follow Jesus, there will be curveballs that sort of hit you, disruptors, things you didn't see coming. And those things, though not caused by God, can be used by God to purge you. It's like going through a fire and you reemerge and you've kind of got to start over in your journey with Jesus. You begin putting life back together. You begin rebuilding a bit. And so what we're looking at now is a story that we're going to move into in the New Testament, or Old Testament, about rebuilding through a man named Nehemiah. And his story is pretty remarkable. Some years ago, I ran into this story, this Old Testament narrative, and there was one statement in this Old Testament story, this narrative, that sort of got my attention and became a mantra for me, right? It's like I started putting it everywhere so that I could remind myself and remind myself and remind myself. And I find myself saying it a lot to other people in this season of my life. It was super important for us in those early parenting years. It got us through the busyness of ministry, the busyness of just life in general, right? Kept us focused on what mattered most, kept us out of certain ditches that were possible financially. When opportunities would come along and we go, no, we have a plan. We need to stay focused. In fact, barely a week goes by for me in this season of my life, or certainly in previous seasons of my life, where I don't reference this statement from the Old Testament, either for myself or conversations with others. And it's found in the Old Testament book of Nehemiah. If you have your Bibles, you can open up there today. It's a bit difficult to find. You may want to use your table of contents to locate it. What I'm going to do this morning, I don't normally do this. I don't normally put the verses on the screen, but we're going to kind of fly through and paint an overview of this book this morning as we introduce it. And so I'm going to jump around a lot. You'll see the verses on the screen, but I encourage you, if you have your Bible with you, you can use it. Also, to set this up, Nehemiah is an Old Testament figure. He's a Jewish exile, an ancient Jewish exile who lived in Persia under King Artaxerxes I. In fact, he served King Artaxerxes I. And the story that we're going to look at takes place around 444 BC. So it's a little context to understand the significance of this story. When the story takes place, the nation of Israel had been a vassal nation under the empire for 300 years. What happens is it loses its sovereignty as its own nation. So for about 300 years, everything in the nation is in disarray. Nations and armies are moving back and forth and marching through and raiding and pillaging and stealing and taking whatever they want. And Israel is just sort of inhabited by the empire. They're a vassal state of the empire. They have no sovereignty, and that's been the way it's been for about 300 years. This began with the Assyrians. The Assyrians marched in and conquered that region of the world. And then the Babylonians came behind them and conquered the Assyrians, right? So when the Babylonians come in, they storm the city of Jerusalem. They invade the city of Jerusalem. They destroy Solomon's temple. If you remember how beautiful a temple that was, they carted off the best and the brightest back to Babylon. If you know your Old Testament, think of the Fab Four. Remember Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? They carted those guys off. That happens under this Babylonian portion of the story. And eventually Persia comes along and conquers Babylon. And when Persia conquers Babylon, Cyrus the Great, the Persian king or the emperor, Cyrus the Great says to the Jews who are living in Babylon now, the ones that they carted off, he goes, you guys, if you want to go back to Jerusalem, you're free to go. You can go home. You're welcome to leave. So consequently, several thousand of those Jews that were living in Babylon went back to Jerusalem, but many chose to stay because they grew up in Persia. They're like, we're just going to stay here. Either way, the nation is divided. So the group who goes back to the city of Jerusalem, the exiles as we'll call them, they go back to the city and they find it in complete disarray from that invasion years ago. It's still smoldering with ash. The walls are still torn down from that siege years before. The gates are burned. The temple had not been rebuilt. Things are tough. And they did what they could to try to pull it all together. They sort of rebuilt the temple as best as they could, but it was kind of a joke of a temple compared to the old one. In fact, the Old Testament says those who knew the old temple, the original one, Solomon's temple, when they saw kind of the new work, they wept, not tears of joy. It was actually sorrow because they knew that it was so pitiful in comparison to that original temple. So economically, things are bad. Militarily, things are bad. In fact, it's just sort of open season on the Jews living in Jerusalem during that time. Neighboring communities would just come pillage them because they had no walls. They had no gates, no protection. So these neighboring communities would just wait for them to accumulate some stuff, and then they would just siege again because there's no wall, no gate, no protection. They would just raid and pillage them because what could the Jews do? And this has been going on for about 100 years where we pick up our story. In fact, where we drop in this morning is about 90 years into that 100 years. Nehemiah, back in Persia, his family never left Persia. And consequently, over time, they became somewhat wealthy and somewhat well-known back in Babylon. Nehemiah even becomes cupbearer to King Artaxerxes of Persia. And while he's cupbearer to the king, his brother, who is one of the ones who moved back to Jerusalem, comes to visit Nehemiah. And he brings with him this entourage. And while he's there visiting, Nehemiah, who's heard about some of the stuff going on back in Jerusalem, he decides, hey, I want to know how things are going. Can you share with me how things are going back in Jerusalem? Because he'd kind of heard that things weren't going well. And this is what they said. This is from Nehemiah's diary, the text of Nehemiah. As you read it, remember, this is Nehemiah's journal. He's writing his journal entries. He says this, they said to me, the remnant there in the province who survived the captivity are in great distress and reproach. So the remnant, these are the ones who went back to Jerusalem, right? They are in great distress and reproach. And what comes next describes that part. He says, the wall is broken down and its gates are burned with fire. So you have this capital city with no wall, right? I mean, there's so many breaches in this wall, like people can just kind of come and go, and there's no gate. And when there's no wall and there's no gate, not only is this dangerous for the people who live there, but this is humiliating. This is a capital city without a wall. It's degrading, humiliating. I was trying to think of a good example for what this might feel like, and don't raise your hands, but I don't know if this ever happened to you growing up, like your parents took your door off your room. You know, like, it's such a humiliating, helpless feeling, right? Or maybe you're the parent in the room who's done that to your kids. Like, don't raise your hands on that either. It's such a terrible thing to do. It's not degrading to you as the parent. It's degrading to them because they can't close their door. They have no privacy. Siblings can come, do whatever they want. Anytime you're not expecting it, an adult can enter your room. You feel totally exposed. Well, in sort of a micro way, this represents the whole city, and it's a capital city, and it's the whole population. They can't keep people out of their city. They can't keep people from coming in and taking stuff. They can't protect themselves from the neighboring areas who would just come in and violate them, steal, pillage, destroy. And Nehemiah goes on. He says, when I heard these words, I sat down and wept and mourned for days. And I was fasting and praying before the God of heaven. So Nehemiah, he's many, many, many miles away from Jerusalem, many miles away from where this is happening. And he realizes that news of what's going on back in Jerusalem just breaks his heart. Isn't it true that sometimes you can find where you're to serve in God's kingdom by what breaks your heart? Well, this so breaks Nehemiah's heart. He couldn't get it off his mind. So he began to pray for wisdom. He began to pray for discernment and direction. And then he did something very, very, very gutsy. Very, very, very dangerous. Remember, he's cupbearer to the king. And so one afternoon, he goes in to serve King Artaxerxes, the most powerful person in the world at this time. And King Artaxerxes realizes something's up with Nehemiah. His body language is off. His countenance is off. And he looks at Nehemiah and he's like, Nehemiah, what's going on? And guys, this is dangerous because the thing is, in those days, you're not allowed to have a bad day around the king, right? You're not allowed to have your countenance down. You're not allowed to be in a bad mood. Oh, no. Things are perfect. Always be happy around the king. You don't bring the king any bad news. But King Artaxerxes notices something's going on with Nehemiah. And he asks him. He can see something's up. His countenance is down. He goes, Nehemiah, what's going on? And Nehemiah does the gutsy thing. He tells him. He goes, my people are in bad shape back home, King. The walls have been torn down. The gates have been burned. I mean, he tells Artaxerxes the whole thing. He puts it all out in front of him. And then he one-ups himself. He goes a little further, even gutsier. He goes, King, can I have some time off? Like, can I have a long time off? Like, can I go back to Jerusalem and help with the rebuild, help my people? I mean, this is so gutsy. It's a huge risk. I mean, think back to that story of Esther with the king then, right? He's taking his life in his hands. And what's crazy is that Artaxerxes says back to Nehemiah, yes, you can. You can head on back. In fact, I'm going to make you the governor of that whole region. Because remember, Jerusalem is a vassal state of the empire. They have to do what the empire says. And so the king says, I'm going to make you the governor. I'm going to give you the resources you need to go back and kind of resurrect the city, help the city. This is a huge answer to prayer. So Nehemiah puts together a caravan, and he has these letters of permission to travel through the empire back to Jerusalem so that if anybody stops him, he can say, oh, I've got safe passage. I've got permission from the emperor. He finally shows up to the city of Jerusalem. And it's worse than he's even imagined. I mean, it's terrible. It's a smoldering trash heap. The people are depressed. Economically, things are bad. The plants, the forests have overgrown the areas where they were supposed to plant their crops. I mean, everything is bad. There's no military. Basically, all the surrounding regions are taking advantage of them on a daily basis. And so one night, seeing all of this, Nehemiah, he does sort of a reconnaissance mission, right? He goes on tour of the entire area, all the way around the city walls, and he takes notes. And then he pulls all the people together. He gets all the leaders together. He's governor now, so they have to do what he says. And he says, look, and he begins to paint an incredible vision. In fact, if you're into leadership or vision casting, you should read the book of Nehemiah. Some of the most compelling vision casting that we see is in the book of Nehemiah. He paints a great, compelling vision. He does it by saying, here's the problem, here's the solution, here's why we need to do something, and here's why we need to do something now. And then this is so brilliant. He assigns everybody together. He assigns everybody a place on the wall to work, to begin rebuilding the wall. And he assigns them the area of the wall closest to where they live. So they have a little incentive for doing it in the first place and for doing it well and quickly. Very smart of Nehemiah. He gives everybody a work assignment. Then he assigns them and sends them to get to work, to repair the wall around the city. And eventually they're going to get to fixing the wall and then getting to the gates. And the gates would bring back the self-esteem of the people because, again, not having a wall or a gate is humiliating, and it offers protection when you do have it. And this is good news. The people are excited. Good news for everybody in Jerusalem. Who is it not good news for? It's not good news for any of those living in the surrounding regions who were used to being able to take advantage of the city of Jerusalem. They felt threatened because a walled city is a military threat. A walled city is a military threat. And so they begin to heckle the workers. And that heckling soon begins to turn into intimidation of the workers. And then that escalates and turns into attacking the workers. They begin to attack the families of the workers who lived outside the walls, and some of them attacking within the walls. And so Nehemiah has to put a stop to the work momentarily. He has to rally the guys again and get everybody together and go, okay, this half of you, you're going to protect while this half of you work. This half of you carry weapons and guard those that are working. For some of them, they have to carry a weapon in one hand and an instrument or a tool in the other for building the wall, right? This is not ideal, but they get back to work with this new game plan, and the work continues day after day after day after day. Now, the ringleader for the opposition to rebuilding the wall was a man named Sanballat. And Sanballat, it's fun to say, you can say it with me, Sanballat. There you go. Sanballat got so desperate because he could see that Nehemiah wasn't going to stop working on this wall. Other people have come along in the past and tried to rebuild the wall, and it took a little bit of heckling, a little bit of intimidation by Sanballat, and they would just shut it down and walk away. But Nehemiah, he ain't stopping, and he decides that the only way forward is he has to kill Nehemiah. So here's what happens. Chapter 6 now of Nehemiah, if you're following along. Now when it was reported to Sanballat, there's our guy. When it was reported to Sanballat, Tobiah, to Geshem the Arab, and to the rest of our enemies that I had rebuilt the wall and that no breach remained in it. So they're getting close to the end of this thing. Although at that time I had not set up the doors within the gates, getting close to the end. Then Sanballat and Geshem sent a message to me saying, come, let us meet together at Shephirim in the plain of Ono. So he sends a message, hey, Nehemiah, let's get together. Let's grab coffee. Let's get, things have been weird between us. We've been at odds, right? But I just think it's been a misunderstanding. Maybe we can get together. Let's meet together at Shephirim in the plain of Ono. But I got word, Nehemiah says, because this is a journal entry, but I got word that they were planning to harm me. They were going to pull him off the wall. This was their goal. They were going to get him isolated from the people. Hey, guys, we're just going to coffee. We're going to go grab lunch real quick. We'll be right back to where he's going to clock out for a second. He'll clock right back in. And they were going to cart him off somewhere and murder him, right? And Nehemiah knows this. So he continues. So I sent messengers to them. And what follows is this statement that stopped me in my tracks. Now, I don't want to show it to you yet. If you're reading it in your text, don't look ahead, eyes up here. As I was studying through the book of Nehemiah, I ran across this statement, this next sentence, this message Nehemiah sends back to his enemies, and it's been etched on my heart. There's seasons where it's like I've wanted to paint it around my house, paint it in my office to keep me focused on what matters most, because I think I need to have this quoted to me about 1,000 times a day when I get distracted. And here's when I quote it to myself. It's when I get tempted. As we all do. We all get tempted. Every family in this room, every couple, every individual, we're tempted at some point with this temptation. I quote it to myself when I'm tempted to opt for what's immediate over ultimate. What I want now over what I value most. Or to opt for something that's optional over what I know is essential. Like I'm tempted, we're all tempted many times to work late, for example, and miss dinner, miss time with the kids, those strategic moments that I need to choose to prioritize, that sometimes I'm tempted to steer away from because I can get more done. And now I need to know to steer into those, right? Or another example, years ago, somebody taught me and probably taught you too. We have someone teaching this group in our church right now, speaking of groups, that a good principle for finances biblically is give, save, live, right? Give, save, live. Many of you have heard that before. Give, whether that's tithing, Old Testament principle, or just generosity in the New Testament. Save, like you put some aside for yourself for later, and then live on the rest, right? Give, save, live. But aren't there those moments that come along, opportunities, or something you want, where you're tempted to go, I don't know if I need to save this week, right? Or maybe I don't need to give this week. Like maybe I just need to do the live part, right? And so we abandon this because an opportunity comes along. And we need to be reminded, right, that in these difficult seasons where we have that choice to make, I don't want to say yes to an opportunity that would mean a no to my family. I don't want to say yes to an opportunity for a great thing now and forfeit a better thing later. And so this statement that I came across is such a great reminder, right? It serves as a North Star for me to orient me. There was this opportunity, this memory that I had of this season in our lives when Hannah and I, a number of years ago, the kids were really young. There was this church that we got connected with in California. It's the craziest story. But on the West Coast, right, I was a big fan of some of the stuff that they did. I was deeply inspired. They had huge success over the way that they've taught the Bible and prioritized people, and they were growing tremendously. And through an odd set of circumstances, me of all people ended up kind of getting to email with some of these leaders, and some of their leadership had this trip planned for the East Coast, which is rare when you live on the West Coast. They're like, we're going to be in Atlanta. We rented this giant house for our whole staff. We'd love if you would come stay with us. And I'm like, shoot, like, of course, like, in what world do I get that opportunity? So I remember going there and connecting with them, and it was fun. I learned a lot about church and about Jesus, and I came back here to Myrtle Beach. And a little while later, they're like, we would like to fly you and Hannah to California to come see the behind the scenes of our church. And I'm pretty naive. I'm like, all right, like, I mean, in what world do you get a free trip to California? So we got somebody to watch the oldest 3 kids. Grayson was still about 6 months old, so we were like, we got to take her with us. We flew to the West Coast. We got to see all the inner workings of this giant church. It was beautiful. It was cool. And then we came back here to Myrtle Beach, and they said, we would like to hire you as our college pastor. And we were flattered. The thing is, like, where this church is a place called Carlsbad, California, and notoriously, it is the most expensive place to live in our country. The most expensive. In fact, nobody who lives there, it's such a beautiful place, but nobody who lives there can be a single income family. And Hannah and I just decided early in our marriage, this isn't a rule for everybody, I want to be clear about that. This is just one that we decided on early in our marriage. We both come from divorce in our backgrounds, right? And knowing the statistics about people of divorce coming together, knowing the statistics about people who struggle financially, like how the impact that can have on a marriage, we just decided starting out that while our kids were young, and as long as we could, we would try to be a single income family. And that's meant different sacrifices and decisions over the years, but we've been able to kind of stay in that lane. And then as the kids have gotten older and gone to school, Hannah's gotten opportunities at their school to be a part of that. And it's just been a commitment that we've made, right? And we made that commitment. This opportunity came along and we prayed about it. It was flattering. It was exciting. We really wanted to consider it, but we knew that if we considered Carlsbad, we would have to forfeit that commitment that we made. And so it sort of helped serve as a North Star. And as we prayed about it, we simply had to lean into that commitment. And as flattering as it was, as good as an opportunity as it was, we had to choose faith and just have the courage to say, this is a no for now for us. We're grateful. We're flattered. This is a no for now, but not forever. See, and isn't it true that's part of growing up? There's certain hobbies, certain activities, certain opportunities that over the years and certain seasons you just have to choose to let go of. Because you realize you try to carry these things with you, and if you try to carry these things with you into like that season of raising kids, I found there were certain things I was trying to bring with me that caused me to resent interruptions from my kids, and they don't deserve my resentment. Those activities, those hobbies, they do. And so I had to lay those down and just choose. You know what? Not in this. This is a no for now, not forever. And you know what? I've never missed any of those things. I've never thought twice about California. I've never looked back. Those things were for a season. And when that season ended with those activities, those things that I tried to bring with me into a new season, it just wasn't time anymore to do those things. It wasn't the season for me to give that much of myself and time and emotion to a hobby because I had 4 little kids running around upstairs and a wife who was desperately trying to do her best to be a great mother. So I packed up all that stuff and I just laid it down for that season. I even gave away my golf clubs. I'm joking. I've never played golf, but I just wanted all the men in the room to gulp a second. Like, I have to give up. Okay, so the story goes on with Nehemiah. Nehemiah says, so I sent messengers to them saying, now, one more caveat before I give you this statement. You guys are like, just share it already. One more caveat before I give you this statement. When Nehemiah assigned people to work on the wall, he was such a great leader that he didn't consider himself off limits for the work. He's like, I'm not going to ask them to do anything I wouldn't be willing to do myself. I'm going to get right up there on that wall and do the exact same task. And so he's up there on the wall, pounding away on the wall. Even though he's governor, even though he's in charge, he got out there and worked on the wall. So when the messengers from Sanballat show up, they're literally shouting up to him on the wall. The optics of this are beautiful. They're shouting up to him on the wall. And he's on the top of the wall, shouting back down to them, working right on the wall where it connects to the gate. And so the messenger looks up, hey, Sanballat, Tobiah, they want to have a meeting with you. And he shouts down, send them a message. Write this down. Take this message back to Sanballat. Are you ready now for the message? You guys ready for the message? Okay, here's the message. Here's the statement. I am doing a great work, and I cannot come down. I'd like for all of us to say that together out loud. Even if you're watching at home by yourself. It's going to be weird, but do it anyway. Ready? Let's say this together. I am doing a great work, and I cannot come down. Now, real quick, I want you to think for a minute about what's most important to you. What's the most important thing in your life? Who is most important? And with that in mind, I want you to picture it. Let's say it again together. I am doing a great work, and I want you to think about your biggest distraction from that thing that's most important to you. And I want us to say it one more time. Let's do it together. I am doing a great work, and I cannot come down. And then Nehemiah, he says the most interesting thing. I love the way he asks a question next that I think for all of us is such an important question as we contextualize it for our own lives. He says this, after saying, I am doing a great work and I cannot come down, he asks this question. He goes, why? Why should I stop the work and leave it to come down to you? Literally, he's physically on the wall, like looking down at these guys. Why would I stop what I'm doing up here and come down to you? I'm up here doing what's most important to me, that makes the most difference to me and to the people who are the most important to me. Why would I lower myself to do something or lower myself for something of less importance? Like, why would I stop this? And that's a great question, isn't it? Why would you do that? Why would I do that? I mean, we know what's most important. We know what's urgent, but we know what's most important. We know what needs to change. We know what needs to get better. We know in our hearts, many of us, what God wants us to do with our lives, or in our lives, our personal lives, our family lives, dating lives, academic lives, whatever it might be. We just kind of know the work that God's called us to. And it's easy, though, to get distracted. And I promise you, I'm as easily distracted as anybody. But why would I come down, Nehemiah says? Why would I come down from what's most important to me? Why would I entertain this distraction? And maybe in your case, you feel like there's something God wants you to do. Why would you stop? Why would you come down? Why would you forfeit, like in Nehemiah's case, what you know God wants you to do for something so much less than that? Why would you give that up? In this season, what God's calling you to? Because you know. Well, they write down Nehemiah's answer. They go back and they tell Sanballat, well, you said he's not going to come to that meeting. But these guys, they are just committed to getting Nehemiah down off that wall. So they send messengers back with the same request, trying to wear him down. In fact, here's what the text says. They sent messengers to me 4 times in this manner. Hey, what about next weekend? We see you're busy. What about 2 Thursdays? Right? You know what, Nehemiah? You just find an opening that works for you. We're flexible. We'll make it work for us. You just let us know when you have time. But guys, this wasn't a scheduling conflict. This wasn't a scheduling conflict. This was a priority conflict. There's always time to put the wrong thing on the calendar, isn't there? We can always find time to squeeze in that thing that takes away or subtracts from what's most important to us. But Nehemiah was so smart. This isn't about trying to find room on the calendar for Nehemiah. This was about priority. And Nehemiah had pre-decided what was most important to him. He didn't check his calendar. He didn't need to check his calendar because he had already pre-decided what was most important. And why would I come down? Why would I come down from what's most important to me and most important to the people who are most important to me in order to do something that has nothing to do with what I feel God's called me to? Why would I do that? He goes, they sent messengers to me 4 times this manner. And I answered them the same way. And how did he answer them, by the way? Together, I am doing a great work, and I cannot come down. He goes, I told you guys that the first time. I told you that the second time. I told you that the third time. I told you that the 4th time. Now, when our kids were younger, and I'm not trying to turn this into a parenting thing, I promise. This is just a principle that got really gritty for us when our kids were younger. And it made so much difference. We decided that in order to be focused on what we needed to be focused on when our kids were young, and there were certain things that we just had to say no to ahead of time because we had to pre-decide that our kids are like, we want to give our time and our energy to that. Whole categories of things. In other words, it wasn't a matter of we can't find time on the calendar. There was just several categories of we go, this is just not important to us right now. There's just certain things that we don't do. And we don't not do them because we can't find time for them. We've chosen to not do them because we've just decided it's not something for this season. Right? In this season, there's other things that are more important. And so when those things would come along, we would call it our no for now, but not forever list. And in different seasons of our lives, this list has changed. But regardless of where you are or what season you're in, you may need a list like that. A no for now, but not forever. In fact, in other words, it's just a no for now. It's not a no forever. It's just a no in this season. We don't do that. We don't participate in that. We don't go to those things, not because they're bad, right? These aren't bad opportunities. In fact, many times they're good opportunities. They're just not wise in this season. It's not a no forever. They're not bad opportunities. It's a no for now. They're not wrong things. They're just time-consuming things. And at this particular time, in this particular season, while I'm rebuilding this, right, while I'm building this thing in my life, I've got to give all of my energy to those things that I feel are most important to me. And it could be that you need a no for now, but not forever list. And the reason this is important is because there's so many good opportunities that come along, isn't there? So many good things. And they're all mostly good. Again, it's not a good versus bad thing. It's a wise versus unwise. And this is not throughout your life either. It's in different seasons of your life. If you're a student, you might need a no for now, but not forever list. If you're a newlywed, you might need a no for now, but not forever list. If you're newly single or raising little kids or whatever it might be, you need a no for now, but not forever list. And then when you get to raising high school kids or a different category of life, different season, the list changes. But there has to be some categories of things in order to get done what you know you need to get done, that you just pre-decide to prioritize that thing that you're working on and pre-decide to say no to these other things in that season of your life. You have to pre-decide. And think about it within the context of Nehemiah's story. He pre-decided that this wall was important. He pre-decided, so it helped him be able to sniff out distractions. Imagine if he had said yes to the invitation, right? Imagine if he had said yes to these guys sending messengers. If he had said yes to that, those guys would have killed him. And even though the results aren't as extreme with you or me, we're not going to die for saying yes to certain opportunities. There are certain things that if you say yes to them, it will kill the future that you have in mind for yourself, wouldn't it? Certain kinds of relationships, if you continue to say yes to. Certain invitations, if you say yes to. Certain things that will rob you of the future you envision for yourself. They may destroy or undermine or kill your opportunity for that dream that you have for yourself or that thing that God is calling you to. And you just have to pre-decide. I'm doing a great work here, and I cannot come down. And so parents, every night when you're tucking your kids in, as you're tucking them, or they're coming in from middle school or high school, you just need to look at them and say to yourself, I am doing a great work, and I cannot come down. Husbands, when you're traveling, you have to look at that picture of your kids or your family or your wife on your phone, and you just need to remind yourself, I am doing a great work, and I cannot come down. Wives, you need to look at your husbands and ask yourself, what did I get myself into? Just look at them and say, I am doing a great work. It's a piece of work. And I cannot come down. In all these areas that are most important. And I hear this a lot too, because a lot of times it can feel like so much of the Bible applies to family. And if you're single, you're like, you're talking to all the married people, but you're not talking to the single folks. Single folks, you're in the most unique position of any of us in this room. You get to pre-decide. You're in the most unique season of your life. And the question for you, the question for all of us is this: what's the most direct route? What's the most direct route to the future that you prefer for yourself? What's the most direct route to the dream that you have for your life, or what God is calling you to? Don't get distracted. If you're a student, what's the most direct route to your future? Don't get distracted. Don't allow ultimate to be put to the wayside. Don't lose sight of ultimate for the sake of immediate. In other words, don't trade ultimate for immediate. Because here's the thing, and I don't know everybody in this room personally, but I know this about you. I can say this with confidence. Every single one of you, you are doing a great work. You have a great work to do. And here's how I know that. Because you're writing the story of your life. Every moment you're alive, every breath that you take, you are writing the story of your life, just like Nehemiah was. This is his journal. We're going to study his journal, his diary entries, but you're writing one too, even if it's not on paper, like it was for Nehemiah. You too are writing the story of your life, and the story of your life is a great work, and you only get one, so you got to make it a good one. This is the only story you get to write. So write a story you want to tell, because every decision you make, every time you prioritize correctly, you're writing a story you want to tell. And maybe more importantly, you're writing the story that's going to be told about you. What story do you want told about you? Well, Nehemiah's enemies. When you read the story, Nehemiah's enemies, they are relentless. He's told them, we're not going to have that meeting. We're not going to have that lunch. We're not going to have that coffee. But they don't give up. They decide they're going to start rumors about him. They start rumors all throughout the community that he's really rebuilding the city because he wants to be king. He wants to get the wall done. He wants to build everything up, right? And then he wants to withdraw and rebel from the empire the way Israel always rebels from the empire. And Nehemiah, you better come down off that wall and put an end to these rumors. And Nehemiah just ignores them, all of them. Because, as some of us have learned the hard way, criticism is a huge distraction, isn't it? Responding to your critics, chasing down all the rumors. Nehemiah just chooses to ignore them entirely. Well, when that doesn't work, they send somebody to Nehemiah. They say, Nehemiah, there's an internal plot within the city. The people are going to overthrow you. They're going to come after you. You better get to the temple where you'll get protection, because there was a law in Jewish culture that you couldn't be arrested if you went into the temple and clung to the altar. And what they were trying to get him to do was run to the temple and cling to the altar to imply he was guilty of something, and then they could get him, right? And Nehemiah, he just ignores that as well. And how does Nehemiah know? How does he know there's a plot? How does he know they're lying? How did he know the would-be assassin's plans? How did he live with such clarity, with such wisdom, with such discernment? This is why we're studying the book of Nehemiah. Because we need to know. We've said as a church, we've gone through these letters, 1st and 2nd Peter. He said, sometimes this thing comes into your life that blows up your life, right? And God is using it to purge you. You've been through the fire, and we're rebuilding. And we have to learn in this season to live like Nehemiah. We're putting it all back together again. We need to know how to live with that kind of focus, that kind of discernment, that kind of wisdom, that ear to heaven. We need to learn, and that's why we're going to study through this together. The text continues, just to finish the story for you. The text continues and it says this. So the wall was completed on the 25th day of the month of Elul, in 52 days. When all our enemies heard it and all the surrounding nations saw it, they lost their confidence. Why? For they recognized this work had been accomplished with the help of our God. They finished the wall. And everybody looked at that and went, God did that. Don't you want that said about you? You want to hear the craziest thing about the book of Nehemiah? There's no miracles in it. None. God never shows up. God never sends a miraculous, he never does. There are no miracles in the book of Nehemiah. Nothing supernatural. Sort of like the lives we live, huh? Just the day-to-day grind, trying to stay focused, putting up with gossip, criticisms, distractions that we experience. But Nehemiah knew in his heart, this is the thing I must do. This is the job I must complete. This is the project I must get to the finish line. These are the people I must love. These are the people I must protect and champion. And regardless of the distractions and regardless of the threats to me and regardless of the danger of not responding to those threats, I have to get this across the finish line. So there's no miracles. There's just dedication to a job. There's hard work, good leadership, all of that's in there. There's confidence in God that God wants him to do this. And then there's success because he stayed focused on what he knew God wanted him to do. So the reason for this overview today is that Nehemiah had to know starting out what it was that God had called him to do, that he had called him to finish this wall. He had to pre-decide that he knew. He had to know. And so he had to live that way. And so knowing is the most important thing as we enter into the study. We have to know what it is God is calling us to build. So here's my question as we begin this study together. And the reason for the whole overview. What's your wall? What's your wall? What is the thing you dare not come down from until it's completed? What is the thing that you have to stay focused on until it changes or until it's restored? Whether it's a year from now or an entire season from now. I mean, this could be a habit that you need to break, a business you need to start, a calling that God has placed on you. Maybe it's a relationship that you need to rebuild. And every time you hear it come up, you feel like, gosh, that's important, but it's not urgent. And so you just don't get around to it. It's important, but it's not urgent. So you go, yeah, I need to do that. But it never feels urgent, so it never makes it from one list to the other. But maybe restoring that relationship is the key to another person restoring their relationship with God. Maybe it's restoring a relationship. Maybe it's completing a degree or retiring a debt. And as you focus in on, like, what is that wall that God has called me to build? What is your wall? The next question that has to be asked, because it's part of the equation, is what are the distractions? What's distracting you? Because you know the answer to that too, don't you? You know what it is that's taking your eye off the ball. You know what you need to focus on, but you also can look at your calendar and your daily routines and you know straight up what it is that's distracting you. What are the obstacles that you need to remove? For some of us, choosing to lay those things down, those are hard decisions, but you know that they're obstacles. So what do you need to eliminate? There's obstacles, but then there's just some things, entire categories of things that you're like, you know what? I just need to eliminate this from my life. It's just a no for now. Not forever, but it's a no for now. Maybe outside of this season I can pick that up, but for right now in this season that's so critical during this rebuild, it's a no for now. And then here's a difficult question, but I have to ask it. Who do you need to eliminate? Let me be clear. Because some of you will take a picture of this and you'll post it somewhere and I'll get in a mess of trouble. I'm not suggesting you eliminate someone, but you know, right? There's those people. Those just difficult people in difficult seasons of our lives. And gosh, I mean, wouldn't it be freer to eliminate that off your schedule? Who is keeping you from being or becoming who or what you want to be? They're just not a good influence on you. And let's be honest, you're not a good influence on them. And this isn't about some people are worse than others. This isn't about being good or bad. It's just time consuming, right? It's just wise versus unwise. And in this season of your life, in order for you to get where you want to go and where God's calling you to, there's an obstacle. They are an obstacle. And to our students in the room, this is what your parents intuitively know. Can I say that too? The Bible says that wisdom is living long enough to have a certain perspective about what can get you off track. And you don't see it yet because you're not old enough. It's not because you're dumb. You just don't see it. But your parents have a sense about this. But when somebody you respect, somebody who loves you, somebody who has no other agenda than your future, when they see someone around you that they go, I just think this is a distraction for you, you should probably listen. Because direction, not intention, direction determines your destination. You have a great work to do. I know you do, because you have a great story to write. And I know you want to write a good one. You're writing it every single day, decision by decision by decision. So one more time, all together, we all say, I am doing a great work here, and I cannot come down. This time I want you to say it like you really mean it. That was like a little bit weak. I am doing a great work, and I cannot come down. Because you are. You're doing a great work, and you dare not get distracted. And for some of you, not all of you, but for most of you, somebody else is depending on you to stay focused. You're telling a story, but they're going to tell your story one day too. And so in this coming season, what is your wall? What is it you need to stay focused upon until it's complete? Because you're doing a great work. So don't come down. Lord Jesus, as we move into this time of just trying to ask you what our wall is, Spirit, would you fill this place? Reveal to our hearts